Category 4 Hurricane Harvey hit Rockport Fulton hard, leaving behind an unimaginable damage. How the city has recovered since. And the moment things became real for TV meteorologist Bill Vessey. This is NTWC Live.
Well, hello everybody, welcome to NTWC Live. Today we are glad to have you with us once again. The setting may look a little bit different. We're not in front of our computer screens today. Instead, we are in Rockport, Texas, where just a few years ago, 2017, of course, Hurricane Harvey came through here, and everybody here remembers it. We have a live studio audience today, and we're going to talk about Hurricane Harvey for the next hour. It's going to be, I think, an amazing program. Some stories that you're going to hear are going to make you go, wow, I'm glad that didn't happen where I am, and you hope it never does where you are. It's going to be, I think, a fascinating hour. Before we get started, we want to thank our sponsors who are part of this program week in and week out. USAA, they've been with us from the very beginning, and we appreciate USAA for all they do. The South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the site of the National Tropical Weather Conference every year in the month of April. Also the Weather Company and Weather Boy, all folks that make these events a possibility. So sit back, relax, and if you have any questions, we can't answer them because we're recording this. It's not done live, but our studio audience will take your questions in a little bit. Now let's go over to Bill Reed and Dr. Hal Needham.
Good afternoon, folks. This has been a wonderful day. We've become the sunny Rockport. Beautiful day today, but almost 6 years ago we experienced a major hurricane in Harvey, and Harvey was, from us meteorologists, very unique storm, one of our worst case scenarios, one that forms close to land, rapidly intensifies, and then makes landfall in a populated area. We wanted to come down here to Rockville some 5 to 6 years later to see how get the stories from the local folks and see how the recovery's going and learn something about that. It's something we don't get into too much when we're talking mostly about the weather. And Hal and I are privileged to have two distinguished guests here, the mayor, Tim Jayroe, the mayor here at Rockport, and Luis Puron, who is the director of the Art District Museum that we are
Rockport Center for the Arts.
Rockport Center for the Arts, right, that we're having this meeting in here. So, gentlemen, thank you for joining us today.
You're welcome.
Thank you for having us. And I guess it'd be interesting. Luis was not here for the hurricane itself. So
no, I was.
You were, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I had that wrong. Luis, how about if you describe what you experienced? Well,
I wasn't here while the hurricane was happening, but I was living in the area. I moved here in 2015, and so on the 24th of August, the day before the storm, we boarded up our art center, which was a 5,700 square foot building right next to Aransas Bay and the Rockport Harbor. And the next day, then my staff and myself, we evacuated the Rockport area, and then the next day is the day the storm happened. And what happened after that was just a lot of frenetic text and phone calls with then Mayor C.J. Wax and then Mayor Pat Rios, Mayor Pro Tem Pat Rios, to try to find out, really what was the status of our building. And I soon found out that it was compromised. Basically, there was no roof over our building, and my concerns were for then what was inside, what had happened to the inside of the building. So on the 30th, on the 29th of August, Mayor Pro Tem Rios asked, told me that it was okay to come back to the Rockport area, and me and two of my staff on the 30th arrived. And then we opened the building. We found out what really was wrong with the building. Essentially, that there was, half of the roof had blown off of the building, and the parts of the roof that were still attached to the building were severely compromised. And there was a lot of damage outside, but we also had a lot of damage inside of the building.
Rough experience. And Mr. Mayor, I understand from our talking before the show that you were the chief of police at the time.
Yes, sir.
How challenging did you find it in that position to ramp up and get things going to prepare for Harvey, given the fact that it formed so close to land?
Yeah, we had watched it through the Weather Service for some time, and it kept weakening and then coming back again. And when it went in the Bay of Campeche and was coming across Yucatan, we kept thinking it looks like it's coming this way. And I know after it parked out in the Gulf a while and sat for about the better part of a day and started coming, we were really concerned. We started encouraging people more than just notifying them that evacuation would be necessary if they could in any way do it and were willing, and hope to have 90% or better evacuation. We didn't get that, but we were very fortunate, and the Lord was really good to us. We had no deaths in the county directly attributed to the storm, but it was very exasperating dealing with people who didn't want to leave. We have no place to put people that are going to be here and can't get out of the county after the storm grows, and so it was an unusual experience. My first time to deal with a hurricane. I was not here back in '67, and if they don't have another one for 30 years, I won't care about it.
It's going to be both. Yeah, that's a pretty big challenge in there. Hal, do you have a question?
Yeah, you know, when we look at this part of the coast, we see this extensive hurricane history in like the 60s up through 70s, even maybe Hurricane Allen in 1980, and then things get really quiet for a few decades. What are some of the challenges in communicating hurricane risk when nothing's happened for a long time?
You know, what happens with us in an area like this, we have a lot of people that move in since the last storm, and especially if you consider 1967 as the last one, a lot of people haven't been around a hurricane before. And I know when I moved here from East Texas, I moved here from Tyler, and we saw tornadoes and such as that, but it was not like this. And trying to encourage people after talking to folks that had experienced hurricanes here was, it was interesting, but I thought it would be a little bit easier to convince people to leave. We had evacuated 3 times prior to this, going back to Gilbert, which was I think like '89.
Correct.
And we got better response then, but Gilbert was big as the Gulf of Mexico, and it worried people a lot. This one, people just didn't see it being bad until too late.
I see, so a lot of people were just determined they're going to stay and ride this out.
Yes, it were.
Well, another question, what's that like as the storm's going on and you know that substantial number of people may have stayed? Are there communications with them? I mean, did you hear from people in distress during the storm?
We had Code Red, which notifies people of an emergency and telling them to get out and making recommendations to them about things that they should do. And so that service was used frequently, letting people know what was going on. But as far as after wind damage starts, we had no satellites where we could use phones. Communications went down. After that, you have no way of getting to those people. We have no way of knowing where they are. There was a lot of search and trying to recover folks after the storm, but we tried every way that we could to encourage people to leave. And a lot of people that didn't leave said afterwards that it wouldn't be a problem next time.
Yep, that's pretty typical. So the storm hit, you have all the damage in here. What process did you go through, Luis, to get through the aftermath of the storm to where you get up with this beautiful facility we're in today?
Well, it was a lot of hard work, as you can imagine. At the very start, it was all about salvage, going into the building and saying to ourselves, okay, what in here is important to us that we need to salvage? And we did have several pieces of art that are in our permanent collection that are seminal pieces because they define who Rockport Center for the Arts is. And so the very first thing that my curator and I did was to salvage those pieces. We actually had a watercolor by Harold Phoenix, who's a very famous artist who's now deceased, and it was at the very top of the wall, and it was still hanging there, yet there was no roof above the painting. And there were several other paintings in there like that, but that one stands out. So we took it off of the wall, we separated this watercolor, that was wet now, and it had a lot of debris on it. We separated from the frame and the glass. We put it in my vehicle, and then I took it to where I was staying in Corpus Christi. And then the next day, our insurance company, we have a fine arts insurance writer out of Washington, D.C., they sent in a godsend, really, Mike Waters, this gentleman from London who came to assess all of the losses in our art collection. And we had some sculptures outside that are part of our public program that were also, damaged. And right away, he wrote us a check so that we can begin the restoration or conservation and salvage effort of our art collection.
No, that's really nice. And I think you were telling me that this building is fully paid for?
Yeah, and so what happened soon after that is the board of directors and I worked really hard to claim the insurance on the building that was destroyed. That building was eventually demolished in May of 2018. We made a full claim from windstorm for that building, and it was almost about $1 million, and that became the angel gift to our capital campaign, which we called Imagine. And that seminal gift to our capital campaign brought in a Rebuild Texas fund with additional funds, and then they brought in another foundation from the Austin area. Rebuild Texas Fund, you may remember, was the Dell families. Michael and Susan Dell put aside a lot of money from their own pockets to fund Rebuild Texas and assist with recovery efforts throughout the coast, up and from all the way from the Rio Grande Valley all the way to Houston that was severely affected by water. Our biggest damages here in Rockport were mostly wind. And then we launched in March of 2018 a capital campaign to build a modest art center that was going to be a $3 million facility, and then the government came knocking with disaster recovery funds, and they added $5 million of economic development administration funds to our campaign. So suddenly by April or May of 2018, we already had a substantial amount, and then we began to vision how to grow the program into areas that we were not, we never had facilities for, like the performing arts and the culinary arts, which are now hosted here at the Rockport Conference Center, the building we're in right now. And then the money, we kept on raising money until late last year, and in December of last year, we opened these facilities to the public, and we were left with a small surplus. We were very blessed to be able to raise the money. These buildings were built with love from all across the state of Texas and investors from all over the state of Texas. And we're very proud to say that we have no debt as a result. We've had a lot of help. The government helped. The city of Rockport was our partner in this construction project, and we certainly could not have done it without them.
Awesome. Al?
Yeah, Luis, so it seemed like an extensive process to raise funds and get government grants. At what point did the design and the specific concepts of this building come into that process? Was that during the fundraising process as far as the actual design?
Yeah, it happened in around 2019. We did a selection process for an architectural firm. We interviewed about 8 or 9 architecture firms from across the state of Texas. We ended up selecting a committee that included members from city government, selected Richter Architects for the project. And then there were a lot of committees that were set up. There was a culinary committee, there was a performing arts committee, there was a building committee, and all of these committees provided the input as to what were our needs, how big should the classrooms be, how many classrooms should we have, how big should the galleries be, and how many should we have. And then all that got fleshed out by our architecture firm, and then the design process was completed in May of 2020. And then the rest of it, came. One of the other things that we had to do that does not mire a lot of projects is we had a building on this property that needed to be relocated. It was considered a historical asset. It was the Klein's Cafe building. And so we moved that building on March 31st of 2021, about 3 blocks from here. And on April the 6th of the same year, we began construction, and construction was completed on December 10th of 2022.
Bill, before we go back to Mayor Jayroe, do you mind if I ask Luis one more question? Something's been on my mind that I'm really curious. When a hazard hits an event space or an art space like that, let's say water comes in contact with paintings or different pieces of art, is it possible to remediate that? Are there dryers that get brought in, or ways to dry out this stuff? Or are there ways to salvage art that comes in contact with water, or is it pretty much a loss?
It just depends on what happened to what surface this painting, for example, might be painted on. On paper, it's really hard. And so what we did is we brought in a consultant from Bernie, Texas, and they took all the art with them. And they have these dehumidifiers where they took, for example, that piece of art that I mentioned earlier, that was a 30 by 40 inch piece of art. They put it in this machine and it takes all the water out of the paper, and then it stabilizes the paper. So when water touches paper, especially that has paint on it, the paper will curl and you'll see all these little waves, which you don't want. And so that machine is able to take all of that. And after that's completed, that conservation, then you reframe it in museum quality framing so that, you know, it'll be better protected for the future.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, here we are 6 years later. Mr. Mayor, how is the recovery going here? Are we pretty much back to normal, or you still have some issues?
I think we're way ahead of what anybody ever expected us to be. The community has worked harder than I could have imagined. I know that the former mayor and Mayor Pro Tem, we were astonished at how hard the people living in this town worked to recover from the storm. And there were people that still have issues because of the storm, and we need to be sure and remember those folks. I won't say that everybody's doing great, but the city is different than it was. We've had a lot of people in town that I have had opportunity to visit with about what they like, about what they see, and they talk about how it has changed so quickly, and it looks like a new place to a lot of them. The Arts Center being where it is good for the downtown area. We lost both the courthouse and the city hall, and they're both being rebuilt within a couple of blocks of this spot, which will put some more energy and building material and so forth in the downtown area, which will be good for our downtown area. But the town has done amazingly well, and people have worked harder than I could imagine to do that, and some of the rest of us get credit for it. But the people of Rockport and Aransas County, Fulton, have worked really hard to get the town back.
Yeah, I can second that. Hal and I, driving in from the north and driving around, it was kind of like we both said the same thing. If we hadn't known there'd been a hurricane here, we wouldn't know what had happened. It looks that good. Mm-hmm. So I always think it's very useful for someone that's gone through the experience, community, what lessons have you learned that are fresh on your mind that we'd like to relay to the inevitable souls that are going to get hit by a hurricane in the future?
You know, thinking back to when it first happened, we knew that we were going to have people coming to help. I mean, there were people who had called us that said, we're coming, we've got truckloads coming. I think that the thing that caught us off guard was how much things and stuff was brought in here, and we didn't have places to put it. We didn't have places to park trucks that came in loaded with supplies for us. There were people that brought clothes in, and some of these clothes, I'm sure that they went to their neighborhoods and got people to put them in sacks and brought it down, and we had no place to put them, and they got stacked up in the middle of parking lots and like that, and were there for a long time. So there were things that we needed to have locations for and places to put things. We had volunteers coming in to help, and some volunteers came and didn't have a place to stay and brought their kids with them. And if you come into a place like this, we didn't have places for our own kids and grandkids. And to bring children in with you, you know, we had to say, thank you so much. We really appreciate the kind thought, but please go home. But the help was immediate. We had people coming. The Cajun Navy from Louisiana showed up and was cooking Cajun food faster than we could get out of the buildings to go eat it. And other groups were doing that. The Gulfport, Mississippi Police Department came and brought in police officers to help us. Now, they have their own trailers. They're used to having hurricanes there. We need some of the material they have. They had an 18-wheeler that pulled their place that they lived in, and another one that pulled the kitchen for them. And it was really a great thing to see. We had people from Rockport, Massachusetts come in to help. Corpus Christi Police Department sent us 8 officers a day for several weeks to help us have enough units to cover the county with 2-man units available. It was amazing how much help we got. The main thing is you need to know that it's coming, and you have to have somebody to organize that and take care of it, because we weren't quite ready for all the stuff we had coming. That's
interesting. I've always, in my experience, I've always had people describe that as a disaster after the disaster. Please send money, not stuff. We'll use the money to buy the stuff we really need. Is that Would that be helpful?
It would. The things that we needed, there was a lot of that kind of thing brought in. I think everybody, the first responders, I mean, you get help from other first responder groups, and I have still got T-shirts and socks and underwear that I don't know that I will ever use, and they're in drawers that my wife would like me to get rid of, because we had so much of that. But we had generators, and we had chainsaws, and we had worlds of things that people sent us that were useful and necessary and very helpful, and we just didn't have places to put them. We did route a couple of trucks that came from up north in Kansas, I believe, to Houston, because Houston was having problems with the rain. As you know, it rained 45 inches, 60 inches, whatever, over a few days in Houston after the storm left here. So we were rerouting trucks because we just didn't have places to put the stuff. And we needed to know that ahead of time. That
really reminded me, we were wondering about that too. It sounds like you got all the help and response you needed, which is great. I thought that would happen. But the perception was that after the big city got dumped on with all the rain, that people had forgotten about Rockport. I get the impression that wasn't really the case.
Yeah, that happens in a way. When I was preparing to come down and do this show, I was looking at some of the material I had, and one of the places here it said that Aransas County got the worst part of the storm, and most of that was in Port Aransas. And I thought Port Aransas is in San Patricio County or Nueces County or whatever. It's not really in Aransas County. But that happens. I mean, people are not familiar with the area, so people will say that kind of thing. In general, you heard quickly about Houston having serious rain problems, but we didn't have water, we had wind. Mm-hmm. There were people that needed a lot of things, companies. When AEP came in and replaced utility poles and we had power back within less than 2 weeks, we were doing amazingly well because they did a tremendous job. So the electric companies, all of those people were tremendously helpful in getting us back on our feet. And we owe a lot to a lot of folks that have helped others since our storm. And it was amazing to see that, and we thank the good Lord for them.
Mr. Mayor, you mentioned that a lot of these resources that came here to Rockport, you had no place to put them, right? Mm-hmm. Here we are in this beautiful, big, new event space that's not only spacious, but also built very resiliently. You have a steel roof, concrete walls. God forbid, if another Harvey happened, could you use a building like this as a staging area to store resources or have people sleep on the floor? Or are there plans to use spaces like this in the recovery if you needed to in the future?
If it didn't give Luis heart spasms to think about it, we would be looking at any place like this to be helpful. Anywhere anything could stay dry, and we would have places to keep it until people could be identified that needed it. I mean, we had things that you couldn't store, 5-gallon cans of gasoline that were brought down that were, plain, straight, good gasoline, and sitting on pallets out here. You can't store gasoline inside here. There's no place to put that. And things that people sent us that was almost jet fuel that came from auto racing places and such as that. You just don't have places to put it. And we did have some folks that were very good at locating folks that had uses for that kind of thing and other places where the storm had affected. But it was something that we would know ahead of time before that happens again, because a lot of us had not been through one at the time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I'd like to get, if there are any questions from the audience you'd like your Mayor or Luis to answer before we set them free from their shackles and go on to 2 other speakers. Yes, sir.
I grew up in Houston, so I have some familiarity with these things. I was there when Carla came through as a youngster, and then I was also a resident at Bristol Children's Hospital when Celia came through Corpus, and then I was here when the hurricane came through. And I was just wondering if you could comment just maybe briefly about the differences. I know with Carla it was more rain and wind, but it wasn't sustainable. It was certainly significant. I remember the winds blowing. But with Celia in Corpus, it was more the microburst tornadoes, which I got to know firsthand. Mm-hmm. But it lasted a very short time, but it devastated the whole community, obviously. And then this hurricane was much longer in duration. And so I'm wondering, can you comment about the differences in hurricanes now versus 20 or 30 years ago?
Well, let's repeat that question too.
The question's a common one I'm asked. What were we had the experience of the hurricanes, in this case Carla of 61 and Celia in 70 and now Harvey. was all, each one was a very different storm. And that's been the case throughout all my knowledge of hurricanes. It's not something new. Hurricane Carlo is gigantic. It was probably larger than Ike, and we talk about Ike being one of the biggest storms in the Gulf. But you look at the observations of weather back then, it was huge. I mean, it went into Matagorda Bay near Port Lavaca with a 22-foot storm surge, and we had 17 foot of storm tide in the Houston Ship Channel, 100 miles away. Celia was small, and it was a tightly wound eye, and like I said, it had the microburst slant tornadoes in the eye wall. Well, it was kind of a dry storm, no real heavy rain, but it was powerful, and it intensified pretty close to landfall. When it was south of Galveston, it was a Category 1, and it was Category 4 when it came ashore, so it was a rapid intensifier. Harvey was closer to a typical hurricane. It formed, it intensified, albeit it intensified rapidly, but one of the things the scientists are learning now that we didn't have the technology perhaps on is that's probably a more common thing. Any storm that reaches a Category 3 or higher has probably gone through a cycle of rapid intensification just to get there. But the impacts are all different. That's why you wonder if there's something different in the storms we're getting today. Yes, sir.
So I stayed here during Harvey, and I was in a house, and I didn't get a chance to board all the windows up, but I put lean-tos on. So I didn't have a chance to cut them all off and bolt them up. And it was an advantage for me. And what I'm kind of asking is implosion. Do we have a lot of the pressure? Is that what destroys a lot of buildings?
Well, the question is, does the pressure difference caused by the hurricane coming in cause a house to implode, or are there other factors in the wind that we're trying to protect for? You want to tackle that first, Hal?
Yeah, that's...
Hal's got a PhD. I'll make sure he answers the tough questions.
No, in general, you do hear people ask that about should we keep windows cracked, should we keep the garage open? In general, in my experience, really, wind-driven debris impacting windows is probably the bigger concern. Generally, trying to board up windows can be good. From what I've heard, in general, taping windows often does not really help as much. But typically, I think it's the force of the debris projected by the wind. As far as I know, pressure differences, it's different than a tornado. A hurricane is covering a vast area, so generally if you can board up or in some way block your windows, that can be of benefit. Also maybe trying to trim trees, things like that can reduce debris thrown at your house.
What I did was I put these lean-tos and I opened my windows up and I watched the curtains go.
Well, fortunately you probably didn't have any debris get in or hard enough wind to break the roof.
The windows were boarded, but I was able to open the windows up.
And it may have worked well on you depending on the side of the house that your windows were and the prevailing wind. The issue with a lean-to could be if you get the hurricane winds could actually pick that up if it got under it and possibly use it as a projectile. You bolted them down,
yeah. I got them down on the ground.
Yeah.
But I mean, my question was implosion.
Yeah. You don't need to open your windows. The studies that I've read, there are actual people that try to blow up houses now in a lab over in South Carolina, and they've proven rather convincingly that you're at much more risk if you open your house up to the wind than if you leave the windows down. In fact, you should even close the doors in your hallways and bedrooms and stuff, because you shorten the path length of any wind that might get in. So I would leave them shut the next time. The lean-tos sound like they work pretty good to you if you had them tied down. Anyone else before we break for the next session? Okay, we'll be right back.
Thanks, guys. It's amazing stuff, and I can't wait to hear the second half of the program. Before we get to that, we want to thank our sponsors once again, USAA, the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Weather Company, and Weather Boy. Those are the folks that make these programs a possibility. If you run across them, tell them thank you, because they make this work for us. And of course, we'll be back on South Padre Island in April. If you want to come down, join us, register, and come be part of the program. All right, let's get back to the guys for more in the second half of today's NTWC Live.
Welcome back, everybody. Here we are, NTWC Live. Today we're doing our show from Rockport, Texas. NTWC has been alive and well for since this is our 11th year now. We have a conference every year down on South Padre Island. Our focus is to train on-camera meteorologists in all things dealing with tropical weather, and so we can help get your communities better prepared. And this is one of the new things we're experimenting with, of coming into some of the communities to do our show and get the flavor and views from the folks that are in the area. Happy to have with us today Juan Pena from the Corpus Christi Forecast Office of the National Weather Service. They're the office that has responsibility for forecasting not only Rockport, but pretty much the entire coastline where the hurricane force aspects of Harvey came in. And Bill Vessey, a retired TV meteorologist, and that's why he's smiling and in a Hawaiian shirt today. But he was on camera on KIII in Corpus Christi during this event. And I think I'd like to hear your story first, since you were there. What was it like covering a major hurricane from your station in Corpus?
It was scary. You know, I was thinking on the drive over here that once the hurricane gets that close, our job is really finished. Our job is to forecast it coming this way. But as it was approaching, one of the things I worried about, if it's coming this close to the coast, is it going to hit Corpus? Is it going to hit Port Aransas on the way up? And it happened in the middle of the night. It was after sundown on a Friday night. And so I wasn't happy about that. But just the actual, when we got hit in Corpus, I remember it was said, the station is shaking. And we had, I guess, soundproof panels, and they're moving around. And so we hit winds, I don't know, 75, 80 miles an hour. They're nothing like what was going on over here at the time. But a couple of things I remember more of all, and we talked about this earlier, is that during the height of the storm, hearing about the big wind, and I got a report at one point, a buoy or something, that the wind in Rockport was 4 miles an hour. We're in the middle of the eye. I remember talking to a lady afterwards. I don't know. She was in a mobile home, and I was on TV saying, put a mattress over yourself. Get in the bathtub and cover yourself with a mattress. And she did. And she said, it saved my life. And then it was 2 weeks later, and when I come to Rockport and Fulton, go to the end of 35 and you make a right to come down this way. And I made a left, and I guess I don't know what the area is called, on the Copano Bay side of Rockport up there. And on the road up there were just utility poles on the ground, one after the other, one after the other, one after the other. And then driving in a neighborhood up there, and you see it on TV, and there was just people, there was nothing left, and they're going through the debris on the ground. It was so sad, so sad. The one thing I'll take from that is that we saved some lives. We saved some lives that night, so it was well worth it, but it was scary.
Interesting. Now, Juan, you're fairly new to the Weather Service, and you weren't here for Harvey, but since you've come to the office here, I'm sure you've learned a lot from your colleagues there. What takeaways did the office have about what worked and didn't work as far as forecast and warning aspects of Hurricane Harvey?
I mean, we learned a great deal from Hurricane Harvey. Something that worked very well was the coordination with not just the media partners, but our emergency management partners and local officials. Coordinating between briefings leading up to the event, forecasting with the National Hurricane Center, forecasting the storm, and us just disseminating that information to the local officials and the public. And I think that had a great deal. Our media partners did a great job of getting the information out there. I think another thing that we learned was that year we did a lot of outreach. We went out into local communities and spoke about tropical systems, spoke about their hazards, and I think that had a great a great positive effect. So we learned a lot that way. Something that we had to our advantage that year is that we had the new GHOST satellite that was launched. So we had real-time, minute updates for the storm, which allowed us to really hone in on a lot of the things that were going on in the storm. For example, as the eye wall made landfall in this area, we were able to see all the little mesovortices within the storm. So, a lot of things went well. That was also the year that the first extreme wind warning went out, which an extreme wind warning is whenever we're expecting sustained winds of 115 miles per hour or greater. That's when the Weather Service would issue that warning, and that pretty much is just if you're ever in an extreme wind warning, that's your signal to get into an interior room, away from windows, and really hunker down, because that's where the worst of the storm is where we're expecting for it to happen. And that was the first year the Weather Service actually issued that warning. We actually issued 3 of those.
The extreme wind warning it was designed around. It's like you're being in a tornado, only it lasts longer. So it's not, people say, well, it's not as bad as a tornado warning. Well, it kind of depends. There's certain tornadoes that will be worse than that, but it's really bad if you get one of those going on there. Hal, you got a question?
Yeah, Bill, during the height of the storm, did you have any interactions with people in Rockport, Port Aransas, some of these other areas? Did you have any way to know what was happening up here?
None. There was no communication at that point. I'm sure anybody who was in Rockport is taking care of themselves. There were probably a couple of messages that got through to us second and third hand, but we just prayed, wished everybody luck. It's about all we could do at that point. It was, I can't even imagine what y'all were going through over here. It was scary on my end. I couldn't imagine what it was like being in the middle of this. Let me say one more thing also, being on TV that night. When it went up to Category 4, and it was approaching, and I don't know if it was 7 or 7:30 or 8 or 9, it just became a Category 4. And that freaked a lot of people in the newsroom out, because we weren't expecting it to get that big. And these rapid intensifications, that one was quick. It was just an amazing evening for the wrong reasons.
Well, a second question for you. 2 years ago, up by Galveston, there was a Category 1 hurricane that struck on the northern part of Matagorda Bay. And so where I live in Galveston, we had sustained winds in the 40s, gusts in the 50s. Next day I heard people on the street calling family saying, that was my first hurricane, it wasn't that bad, right? And I'm thinking, well, you were 30 miles an hour from hurricane force winds. It was really a miss in a sense. When you get closer to Corpus Christi, you can argue it was a near miss, a close call.
Oh, yeah.
But do people down there, are there people that think, oh, that was a Cat 4 hurricane, it wasn't that bad?
Yep. Because, even if you're in the middle of 70, 75, 80 mile an hour winds, that's a pretty strong wind. And you're figuring, oh man, this is bad. I can't imagine what it's like being in 130 mile an hour wind. Mm-hmm. There's people in Corpus, we dodged a bullet. And not that far away. Mm-hmm. But 75 mile an hour winds rock and roll you.
How good were the radar estimates? Do you remember?
From what I was told, the radar estimates were fairly spot on. Interesting to note that we did, using the Doppler radar, we did have a reading about a few hundred feet off the ground here in Rockport of 228 mile an hour winds.
Hey,
so
probably caught one of the mesovortices.
Yeah, so that was probably one of those. But yeah, radar performed well. Stayed operational, and something just to piggyback off what Bill said for everybody in Corpus. That look at some numbers here. Max wind reports that we have for the Corpus area is anywhere between 74 to 87 mile an hour winds. Mm-hmm. So in reality, Corpus Christi only went through a Category 1. Yeah. So it wasn't even if when you look at San Patricio, still had maybe Category 2, Category 1 force winds. Not really until you got into Aransas Pass and into the Rockport area where you really saw the damage and the wind readings from the eye wall. There were several studies and institutions over here, studying the storm. I believe I want to say it was a group from Oklahoma University had I know Oklahoma University had something set up near Rockport Airport. I think also an institution from Florida had when they measured 152-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah, they had it's called Doppler on wheels. They rigged up a 18-wheeler truck, heavily weighted on the bottom with a Doppler radar mounted on it, and they try to capture up close, very high-resolution data so we can learn. That's how we could learn what's going on in the eye walls of these things. When I first started out, we didn't know about these mesovortices. We flew airplanes into them and got lucky and didn't crash.
So Rockport, that's where we measured the 152-mile-an-hour wind gust in Rockport. Something that's also that we try to hammer home is how these strong winds can travel inland. Looking at look at the Category 3 wind field, Category 3 force winds extended all the way into Refugio County, even reaching parts of Goliad, Victoria, and B County, which are pretty well inland. So these strong Category 3 force winds and greater made their way far inland just from beyond the coastal impacts.
If I might, you asked me earlier about my recollection of that. The Social Security number on your arm. That, I said something, when we got up to Category 4, the station freaked out. When the mayor announced that, to put your Social Security number on your arm, that really hit home.
And if I could say something about the rapid intensification bill, I know we work with the Hurricane Center, something that maybe you could shed some light on. I wasn't here, but from what I was told from several people that were here for Harvey was, as the Hurricane Center is forecasting the system, they redeveloped the bid Campeche, and they were anticipating at that point just strong tropical storm Category 1. Then as the hours passed on and the rapid intensification models, the ship's indices, all those rapid intensification models, the probability of undergoing rapid intensification were so high that the senior hurricane forecasters at the Hurricane Center were they were in awe of what could possibly be coming. So I don't know if you can shed some light, if you're in the forecast that's there at the Hurricane Center and you see such great probabilities of this undergoing rapid intensification in 24 hours from landfall now, where you're condensing the timeline of when it's going to make landfall, and you maybe from a Category 1 that you originally forecasted, maybe like now a Category 3, 4.
In 2008 is when I started as director of the Hurricane Center, and we verify everything that we forecast there. And we've been studying rapid intensification because we know that's a big problem and trying to improve on it. We were successful in capturing an observed change like that and then extrapolating it 1 out of 10 times. Harvey is the first one I recall where the forecaster forecast a rapid intensification from a Cat 1 to a Cat 3. Based on that kind of data we were looking at. We wouldn't have had the confidence in the past if you're missing them 9 times out of 10 to go that far in advance. You don't want to over forecast every time you see a storm either. So we're making great strides in that. I think the track record now on the rapid intensification is 4 or 5 out of 10 we're going to catch. That means we're still missing more than half of them. It's a very challenging problem in the forecast world, but extremely glad to see that the forecasters have taken the initiative to take that chance to learn how to forecast that stuff.
Yeah, one last question before we go to our audience. Juan, the National Weather Service does a great job on outreach and education. What are some things you do here in the region to just educate the population about hurricane hazards?
I mean, it's pretty much we incorporate all that into our hurricane outreach. We not only talk about the hazards of the storms, but we talk about how we collaborate with our media partners, how we collaborate with the Hurricane Center. We touch on how they collect their data, all the weather models and how all that data goes into forecasting. We talk about ensemble. Some of the new stuff that the Hurricane Center is putting out is the probability of tropical storm force winds. The probability of hurricane force winds, because as we know, or might not know, the cone, the forecast cone shrinks every year. As better forecasting, as the Hurricane Center's forecast gets better and better, the cone shrinks every year as the margin of error shrinks due to better forecasting. So impacts are being extended well out of the cone and out of the forecast cone. So we try to educate on that, flooding rains, these strong winds, all this can impact well beyond the forecast also. Just because you're not in the cone per se doesn't mean you're safe. So a lot of this new stuff that the Hurricane Center is doing with the probability of tropical storm force winds and all that is a great tool, and we try to educate. We try to put that into our outreach, into our hurricane talks. Now, pretty much this month, I know we have a few hurricane town halls set up, both virtually and in person. So if we can't get to every single location, we definitely encourage the public to register for one of those, at least virtually. Gives us an opportunity to, share our insights, and that gives them an opportunity to ask questions, stuff that they might want to know before the season or in preparations. And pretty much just what we stress is just, prepare before the season. The last thing you want to do is be in long lines at the grocery stores getting water last minute, going to your, home improvement store to get plywood last minute. Prepare before the season, and just the fact of, I think Bill touched on this earlier, not every hurricane is going to be the same. Every hurricane is going to be different impacts, different hazards. So just prepare ahead of time. You never know what storm is going to devastate a community. You never know what storm could alter your life, from a damage standpoint. And although we have hurricane outlooks and it gives us a great idea of what might happen, you still got to be prepared, because you can have a slow season and still be impacted.
Yeah, sure.
Looking back in 1992 when I was a child, it was a very slow season. Hurricane Andrew didn't develop until the end of August, right? But that devastated South Florida. So it doesn't matter if you have an active or an inactive hurricane season, you always got to be prepared for that one possible storm that could develop and could potentially impact somewhere.
Yeah,
Thanks, Juan.
I wanted to put this in there because it's very pertinent, I think, for people that live here now. You've taken a direct hit. The eye of the storm went across here, but you didn't have a bad storm surge. You had the storm surge, but it didn't wash. It wasn't like at Fort Myers Beach where it washes everybody off their property. If you have a large hurricane, the next storm called a large major hurricane that decides to make landfall somewhere south of Corpus Christi, you'll probably have a terrible storm surge here. And I bet you'll have challenges convincing people they need to leave, because they'll say, oh, it's going. I had the same problem with the folks in Galveston with Ike when the forecast was for it to be down around Matagorda. They didn't want to call an evacuation because, hey, the storm's going there. I said, this thing's huge. It's coming. If it goes in there, you're going to get terrible storm surge. So that's something you want to keep in your mind when you're preparing for the next storm, is the impacts outside of this skinny black line where the center's going.
People assume if the eye comes right over you, that's a worst case scenario. It's not. It's if it hits, even if Harvey was 10 miles south of here, if you shift that track 10 miles south, you probably would have had a very different outcome here. Maybe still really bad wind, but also massive amounts of saltwater flooding with big waves. So in a sense, if the eye comes right over you, it's as bad as it is, it's often not the worst case scenario.
Every hurricane has its own different hazards, right? So as Harvey made landfall here in Rockport, the majority of the tornadoes were really felt in the Houston area, right? In the Houston CWA. So when the Hurricane Beulah made landfall in deep South Texas, we got a bunch of tornadoes and over 15, 20 inches of rain here in South Texas. So each hurricane is different, but just piggybacking off the storm surge, the majority of the storm surge that we saw here was pretty much, it wasn't the Gulf water, it was just the waters off the bay. So we saw 7 feet of storm surge, and that was pretty much just the front of the eye wall pushing the water off Copano Bay into the inland. And as the eye progressed and went further inland, well, now you got the backside of the eye wall, right? Yeah. So now you have the water being reversed. Now all the water that was being pushed onto the onto the west side, to the land now gets reversed, and that 7 foot of storm surge was pushed into the Holiday Beach area, and so. A lot of the storm surge that we saw here locally was more bay waters, intercoastal waters. So to piggyback your point, if we ever get a more ideal setup for storm surge, I mean, that could be potentially more devastating and get maybe like the 10 to 12 or greater storm surge that we saw from Harvey, further up north, in the Matagorda Bay area that we reported.
We have time for some questions from the audience. Anybody have questions? Yes, sir.
Talking about storm surge, the fact that we have a storm surge that actually winds up inland, in this part?
In a big major event, it changes the character maybe. You're going to break up some of the wave action. The barrier island will take care of that, but that water's got to go somewhere. So it's still going to come over the island. Like in the Bolivar, when it got run over by Ike, the storm surge was, even though it's a barrier island, the storm surge went 15 miles over Chambers County, up going on inland over that, carrying the debris with it. So I think some people refer to the barrier islands for a hurricane as a speed bump. If you had big tall dunes, it'd be very different. Like in Florida, you get really large sand dunes in the panhandle, and it tends to stop the surge. It's all about having the elevation to make the break.
It can definitely impede the flow of water to some degree, but at some point they're going to get overwashed. And like Bill said, the water can go inland 15, 20 miles, and it shocks people. They're like, what? I don't even live on the coast, and they have storm surge.
Mm-hmm. Yes, sir.
Two quick questions. One is, how far out can you predict hurricanes now? There's companies I know that are private firms that consult with big oil companies, for instance, that have need for the most precise information with their oil rigs and things like that. So how far out is it possible to predict with certainty or with some reliability? And the second thing is kind of get back to what Bill said. Is there any sort of service that's available to communities to help advise them as far as trying to help get the communities ready for whatever needs to be done? Because it changes, obviously, and it can change rapidly. But sometimes motivating people to move is one of the hardest things. And I know that the highways get congested, which we all know. So early information, moving people would be of paramount help.
We had two questions. One was about the how far out can we accurately provide a forecast on hurricanes, and I'll get to that one in a second. I got a quick answer for the other. How do you get information out to your citizens? We really rely on you guys, the locals, and it falls on elected officials, their emergency managers, and other officials in the community working with, like, the Weather Service and the media to educate the people there. It'd be nice to do it from the Hurricane Center, but there's 50 employees in 2,000 counties. It's just physically impossible. Forecasting. When Celia came in, a 24-hour forecast was good to about 120 miles error. Today's 124-hour forecast is good to about 30 miles. We didn't even try to go beyond 3 days. It was so bad. Our 3-day error was around 400 miles. Now our 3-day error is around 100. We've pushed the specific forecast to where a storm will go out to 5 days, and we'll outlook them. The development one out to 7 days. I think the folks that do for, like, offshore oil do a 7-day, and they've shown some skill in it, but the end user understands very well that there's a lot of error in that forecast, and they'll have to adjust to a new forecast. The problem we have, and it showed up with Ian, is people will anchor on a forecast. You give them a forecast 5 days out. This is going to, in your case here, say it's going to the west end of Galveston Island, and people say, we're out of trouble. They don't pay any attention to it, and the forecast starts drifting back to the west. Because the pictures are precise, the accuracy isn't. That it changes as you get closer.
And it's interesting, in today's day of social media, people can grab a model run that's predicting, it'll show a weather map 2 weeks in the future, and all of a sudden this starts sharing like crazy on social media, and it looks authoritative because it's like Bill said, there's precision. You see all the pressure patterns, but then when you look at the date, wait, this is 2 weeks from now. So really anything, the National Weather Service, they have the tropical weather outlook out to 7 days, I believe. That's a good thing is to glance at the National Hurricane Center page, tropical weather outlook out to 7 days. Beyond that, some of these model runs that are 1 to 2 or more weeks in the future, you can get an idea, potentially something could be in the Gulf, but the big picture is it's hurricane season. Something could happen, like we've talked about, being prepared, having your supplies, but not to look too specifically at anything beyond a week for sure.
Let me just say real quick, I think the mayor mentioned it earlier, that if another storm was coming toward Rockport, everybody would be hightailing out of town. People who maybe moved here I don't know, 3-4 years ago, probably, we'll see what happens. I think if you've been through a storm, you know the next one, you ain't sticking around. If you haven't been through a storm, no matter what anybody tells you, it takes a lot to get into here. It really does. I tried for years and years and years. You always get frustrated. You can't make people do things. I mean, and until you're through it, and then you say, now I get it. Now I get it. So that's it. I think that's a battle. It's tough to win.
Yeah, and then I think just one quick answer. I think you mentioned something about evacuations and leaving town. I mean, if just know where your thresholds are. Know what has, you know, what if it's flooding rain. If your neighborhood floods during the afternoon and during a thunderstorm like mine does, odds are during a hurricane you're probably going to get major flooding issues. So me personally, I have my wife and my 2 little toddlers, 3 and 2 years old. So my plan for them is, you know, if there's something that's even remotely possible that can hit Corpus Christi, I'm not waiting for anybody to tell me that, you know, to evacuate. I'm telling them, you know, grab the kids, pack a suitcase, go to San Antonio for a few days, go on vacation, right? So just know, you know, what hazards are in store for you, you know, and just evacuate early. The earlier you can evacuate, the better it is. You avoid traffic, you avoid more headaches on the street. And if you do run into an issue like a flat tire or something, you know, you have time to fix it before it gets too late and too bad.
Well, gentlemen, thank you for being with us today. I can't believe this hour went this fast, and hopefully we'll only come back here to Rockport for fishing and eat at a great restaurant in the near future, and I'll talk to you about hurricanes.
Thank you guys. Amazing program today. I think a lot of lessons learned. I think we can all take stuff away from what the folks here in Rockport learned from Hurricane Harvey, and hope we never have to put it into use, but you know, someday somebody will, and probably this hurricane season it'll affect somebody somewhere. I want to thank our sponsors who make this program a possibility: USAA, of course, also the South Padre Island Convention and Visitors Bureau, the Weather Company, and Weather Boy. We appreciate all they do for us. We'll be back next week, Wednesday at 10 a.m. with another program for you. Join us again next week for another NTWC Live. We'll see you then.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of NTWC Live Hurricane Center Podcast. If you did, head over to Apple Podcasts and leave us a 5-star review. And join us next week. This is NTWC Live.